She said it at 2:14 in the morning, from 3 feet away, in a voice that had none of the defenses she'd spent 9 years keeping in place. I know the time because I checked my phone 9 minutes earlier, not for any reason, just the particular restlessness of a man lying in the wrong half of a hotel room, sharing it with his best friend for the first time. Listening to a wedding band wind down 2 floors below, not sleeping. The room was dark. The window held the city. She'd been asleep for over an hour, on her side, facing the wall, and I'd been not sleeping in the other bed like a reasonable person, telling myself this was a completely normal situation. Then she said, in a voice almost too quiet to reach me, "Marry me." And then, after a pause just long enough to let it sit there, she said my name. I did not move. The room held still around those 2 facts. Outside, the band finished their set. I lay in the dark of a hotel room in the city where 2 of our closest friends had just gotten married, stared at the ceiling, and understood that I was not going to be able to file this one anywhere useful. My name is Noah Daly. I'm 33. I design books for a living, specifically the way they look, the jacket, the typography, the thing that tells you what a story is before you open it. I spend my professional life finding a true shape for a thing in a very small amount of space, which is good work to be good at, and also a somewhat ironic way to have spent 9 years not saying something. Her name is Simone. She teaches secondary school English, which means she spends her days making 17-year-olds care about books they didn't choose. Partly an act of persuasion, partly an act of will, partly just the particular quality she has of making whatever she's paying attention to feel like it was worth the attention. She has small gold stud earrings she's had for years, a gift from her grandmother, and when she's exhausted she takes them off first, before her coat, before her shoes, and sets them on whatever surface is nearest. I have known this for 9 years. I have never once stopped to ask myself why I know it. We met in college. First week of freshman year, she knocked on my door across the hall to borrow a pen, said she'd bring it back in 5 minutes, and stayed for 3 hours talking about a book she'd read on the bus and whether its ending was earned. I thought it wasn't. She thought I was wrong. By the time she left, she had not returned the pen, but she had proved her point about the ending, which I accepted privately while maintaining my position out loud for about another 3 weeks. This is, in retrospect, an entirely accurate preview of the 9 years that followed. We have been inseparable in ways that have puzzled and occasionally exasperated everyone we've dated since, including, if I'm honest, the people we dated. She is the first call when something good happens and the person already in my head when something goes wrong. She quotes things without attributing them, lines from books, poems, once a road sign she'd found funny 3 years earlier, and waits to see if you catch it. When she's reading something she loves, she goes so still the room adjusts around her. She laughs at her own jokes slightly before she finishes them, and is never embarrassed about it. She has an opinion about every cover I design, and she is right about it roughly 2/3 of the time, which I have found, over 9 years, both professionally useful and personally inconvenient. She told me once, as an observation and not a criticism, that I design book covers because I like knowing what a story is before I commit to it. I have been sitting with how right that was for 4 years. I have not, until tonight, applied it to us. We are best friends. We have been very clear about being best friends. We have made this clarification with, in retrospect, a slightly suspicious amount of energy to a significant number of people over 9 years. I was now lying in a dark hotel room reconsidering the energy. The wedding was Marcus and Claire's, 2 years of watching them circle the truth, and finally, on a Saturday in October, A ceremony in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and flower arrangements that had clearly required someone's complete dedication to get right. Simone and I had both been in the wedding party, which meant 3 days in each other's company, which is not unusual for us. What was unusual was spending those 3 days in a room that had been carefully arranged to make everyone think very specifically about love. The ceremony smelled of white flowers and warm wood, and the particular stillness a room of 120 people gets when they all go quiet at once. I watched Simone during the vows, not deliberately, just the way your eyes find the person in a room you know best, and she had the expression I'd seen at films she loved, and concerts she hadn't expected, and once, looking at a building I was describing badly and thought she wasn't listening to. The expression that means she is fully inside something and has forgotten to perform otherwise. She caught me looking. She did the small, private eye roll she does at herself when she's been caught feeling something in public. We both faced forward. Later, during the first dance, she leaned over to me and said, very quietly, "This is the part I always find difficult." She wasn't talking about the dancing. I didn't ask her to explain. I understood, which is the thing about Simone. You understand her, and she knows you understand her, and neither of you has to make it explicit, and that has always felt to me like a thing to be grateful for. I did not examine, in that moment, whether gratitude was the complete description. At the reception we did what we always do at other people's significant events, stayed in each other's orbit the whole evening, gravitational and automatic. We danced to the second song because neither of us wanted to look like we were waiting to be asked by someone else. She took the best bread roll from my plate at dinner, and I performed more offense than I felt, which is a ritual we have repeated at approximately 30 meals, and which I can see now. Clearly, I have always enjoyed more than the bread warranted. At 11, she took her earrings off and dropped them into her bag without breaking the conversation. I noted this and did not examine why I noted it. At midnight, the booking error became apparent. 1 room, not 2. She made the face she makes when she's decided not to make a fuss about something, and I said it was fine. And it was fine, and we established a geography to the room that neither of us acknowledged we were establishing, and she was asleep by 1:15, and I was not, and the wedding band was finishing downstairs, and that is how we arrived at 2:14. Here is what I did with that information. Initially, nothing. I lay in the dark and breathed like a man who was asleep, because it felt important that she not know I had heard, because I hadn't decided yet what exactly I'd heard. She could have been talking to anyone. She'd been inside a wedding all day. The word was in the air everywhere she went. She could have been dreaming about Marcus and Claire, or a dream that had nothing to do with me and simply surfaced the first name available. Coincidence. Ambient wedding energy. Something that meant nothing. I went through this. I considered it carefully. I spent approximately 40 minutes on it. And then I arrived at the moment every honest person eventually arrives at, which is the moment you realize the explanation you've been building is the most complicated available, and the simpler one is right there. And the only reason you haven't taken it is that it would require you to do something about it. The simpler explanation. Simone had spent 9 years across from me in restaurants and libraries and at other people's weddings, and she had said those 2 things in her sleep in the order that put them together, and I already knew, at 2:14 in the morning, what that meant. I had probably known it for longer than I was prepared to account for. I had just been very thoroughly engaged in the work of not knowing it. I lay there and let the rest of the inventory come, which it did, now that I had stopped arguing with it. The way I always know when she's cold before she says so. The way I have read every book she's recommended without her having to ask twice. And remembered where I was in my life when I read them. and carried them next to the conversation we had about them. The way her number is the first one my hand knows when something happens, good or bad, before I have consciously decided to call it. I had been calling all of this friendship, which is not wrong exactly, but is, I now understood, at 2:14 in a hotel room with the city in the window, not the complete sentence. I design how a story looks from the outside. I had spent 9 years constructing the cover to ours. It had never once occurred to me to open it. I did not sleep. The next 2 days went strange, in ways that would have been invisible to anyone else, and were entirely legible to me. She was quieter than usual, not unhappy, not distant, just operating with a millimeter less of her normal frequency, the way people do when they're carrying something and haven't decided what to do with it yet. I watched her decide, 4 separate times over coffee the next morning, to say something, and then not. Her thumb went to her earlobe twice, the absent gesture of reaching for an earring she'd taken off and not yet put back on. She does this when she's working through something. I know this the way you know the habits of someone you've been paying close attention to for 9 years without telling them you're doing it. At one point she looked at me across the caf table with an expression I recognized as the one she wears when she is trying to read a situation without visibly trying to read it. She said, very carefully, "Good wedding." "Good wedding," I said. She looked at her coffee. I looked at mine. Outside, the October street went about its business, indifferent to the conversation that was not happening at our table. "Claire looked beautiful," she said. She did. Marcus cried. He did. She nodded. Neither of us said anything for a while. The caf was warm and smelled of ground coffee and the particular mid-morning quiet of a Sunday after a late night, and we sat inside it together like two people who were completely fine and had nothing specific on their minds, and it was the most work I had done at a table in some time. The second thing was on the drive home. 2 hours in, radio low, the comfortable silence we've always been able to do, and she said, not looking at me, watching the road, "Do I talk in my sleep?" I kept my eyes forward. "Sometimes," I said. Which was not technically an answer to what she was asking. She said, in the tone she uses when she's filed something under later, and we drove another 40 miles without saying anything, and I could feel the shape of her thinking beside me the whole way. I have poor survival instincts around that particular silence. This is not a new problem. The fourth thing happened at brunch the next morning, which we'd been talked into by the lingering wedding guests. We were at a long table, crowded together the way those mornings go, and Marcus's aunt, a woman I had met twice and who had clearly formed opinions, looked at us and then at Marcus and said, to nobody in particular, "How long have those two been together?" The table went slightly quiet. Simone said, at the same time as me, "We're not." We both stopped. A beat. "Best friends?" I finished. Marcus looked at his aunt with the expression of a man who has been having this conversation for years and finds it both tiresome and completely deserved. His aunt said, of course, in a tone that meant the opposite, and the table moved on, and Simone reached for her coffee, and I reached for mine, and we did not look at each other for about 30 seconds, which was the longest 30 seconds that table had ever contained. The third thing happened that evening. She'd borrowed my jacket, and when she reached into her bag for her earrings, she found them in the jacket pocket instead. She dropped them in without thinking when she took them off in the car. She set them on my kitchen counter and looked at them sitting there. And then, up at me. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you not to be careful about it." That landed. We were in my kitchen. October evening coming in through the window she'd opened without asking, the way she always does in my apartment. She was sitting on the counter the way she always does. The earrings were between us on the surface. "Did I say anything?" she said, while I was asleep. It was not quite a question. The shape was a question, but the weight was a confession. She already knew there was something to ask. I could see it in the way she was holding herself. The stillness of a person who has been keeping something in place with both hands and has finally, deliberately, chosen to let go. I had thought about this moment. I had a version of myself ready who would say, "Nothing, not a word. Let's go back to normal." I knew that version was the coward one, and she deserved better from me. "You said two things," I said. She held my eyes. "Tell me." "You don't have to know them," I said. "We go back to whatever this is, and I forget I heard anything, and we're fine. We will always be fine. You know that." She picked up one of the earrings, turned it in her fingers, looked at it, and then at me. "I need you to tell me." So I told her. I told her she'd said marry me. And then I told her she'd said my name. Both things, in that order. In the voice she uses when there's nothing in the way of it. She went still in the way she does when something has fully arrived. Completely still, the earring in her hand. The kitchen holding the sound of what I'd just said. I let her have the silence. I owed her that much, and more. The kitchen is a small room. I have been in it alone for 3 years, and I know its proportions the way you know a room you live inside. It felt different now. Not smaller, but more present, more specific. Every surface and angle registered. The evening light was going. The window she'd opened let in a sound of traffic and the distant particular smell of October air. I watched her turn the earring over in her fingers, once, twice, the way she turns a sentence over when she's deciding whether it's the right one. I watched her not look at me. I watched her decide to. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't apologize. You were asleep. I'm not apologizing for it." She looked up. Her voice was steadier than I would have managed in her position. "I'm apologizing for it taking 9 years. Something in her face shifted, not breaking, just finally putting something down that had been heavy for a long time. I have spent 9 years telling myself, this is just what we are, because I know what it would cost if I got it wrong, and I couldn't find a way to know in advance whether I would. So I stayed where it was safe, and I was very loudly only your friend. A breath. I convinced myself the loudness was honesty. I think it was the opposite. Something happened in my chest that I am not going to attempt to describe. I spend my professional life finding words for what things are. I do not have the ones for what her face looked like in that kitchen, so I'll leave that where it belongs, which is in the room where it happened. I had a plan, I said, for if this ever happened. I was going to be calm about it and tell you it was nothing, and we were going to be completely fine and not do any of this. I looked at her. You told me not to be careful. I did, she said. So I reached across and picked up the earring that was still on the counter between us and held it out to her. She looked at my hand. She took the earring, and when she did, her fingers closed around mine and she held on. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. From across the room, inside her coat pocket, her phone buzzed. Then again, a third time. Marcus texts in threes when he has something to say and wants you to know it's important. She'd told me this years ago, and it had never changed. She did not move to check it. That's Marcus, she said. I know. He'll want to know how the drive went. I'll tell him tomorrow. Tell him it took longer than expected. She was looking at me now, the way she hadn't let herself all weekend, fully, without anything in the way. Tell him there was a detour. 2 months later, Marcus worked it out before we told him. He texted one word. Finally. All capitals. no period, the specific punctuation he reserves for things he has been waiting a long time to be right about. She showed me the screen. I told her he'd been saying it to my face for about 3 years, which I had not gotten around to mentioning before. A year after that, she still sits on the counter in my kitchen. The earrings have a specific spot on the nightstand now. She set them there once, then again, and at some point it became their place, the way everything about her has become a place. My apartment has changed in small ways that nobody else would notice, and I notice every one of them. There is a window that gets opened without asking. There is an ongoing disagreement about the lamp that I have accepted I am not going to win. There is a book on the shelf that was hers first, which she has not asked to have back, and which I would not return anyway. Years later, when people ask how we knew, and people ask, because 9 years is a long time to not know, she says she knew in her sleep, which is technically true and entirely unhelpful as an answer. I say I knew the moment she sat on my counter and asked me not to be careful, which she says is not satisfying. I say it is the most accurate answer I have. We have not resolved this. We are both extremely committed to being right, which has not changed at all, and which I do not expect to change, and which I have come to understand is one of my favorite things. What would you have done if your best friend said your name in their sleep right after something that rewrote 9 years? And have you ever been so careful not to lose something that you almost missed what it could have been all along? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one was true about you in some way, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.